Okay, hello, welcome everybody to this March webinar of the British Institute of Persian Studies. And thank you, I can see people are joining in. So I'll just do a little bit of an introduction while we wait for those few more people to come in today. We've got John Hyland is going to be speaking to us on Persia's Greek campaigns. And there you are, John. Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to tell you a little bit about John, he is at the Department of History at Christopher Newport University in Virginia in the United States, and he has a PhD in the ancient Mediterranean world from the University of Chicago. And the book that he's going to be talking to us about today is actually his third book. And so he's also written Persian Interventions, the Achaemenid Empire, Athens and Sparta, and also co-edited Brill's Companion to War in the Ancient Iranian Empires. And we're really excited to hear about the Greek campaigns today. Before we get started and before John gets started on that, I just wanted to acknowledge that today we are talking about ancient wars on a day and an age when we have war ongoing at the moment. And just to reiterate the message that has been put out on the BIPS website that, we as trustees of BIPS are very saddened by this war, and our thoughts are with the people of Iran and the people in the whole region who are being affected by this conflict. But in the meantime, it will be really interesting to hear about a very different kind of warfare within a very different sort of world system with different rules and different technologies, very different from today. So I will hide myself away and I will hand the floor completely over to John. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eva Leila, for that kind introduction. And thank you so much to the British Institute of Persian Studies for the opportunity to share my research. Most of all, thank you to all of you who are tuning in to watch today. Kheli Motashekaram. I am very grateful that you're spending part of your time listening to me talk about my work. I'm just going to share my screen, and then I will get into telling you about my research on Persia's Greek campaigns. So again, thank you all so much for listening and giving me this opportunity to share with you. I am deeply grieved to be giving this talk in a time of war, and my sympathies also go out to all who are affected by this ongoing conflict. But I'm here today to talk about war and empire and political performance, which are themes of painful modern urgency and relevance, but were also incredibly important in ancient empires and ancient societies. And today I'm going to focus on one of the most famous episodes of military conflict in ancient world history, the so-called Persian Wars, or military campaigns by the Persian Empire under the Achaemenid royal dynasty, and their campaigns against the Greek city-states in the 5th century BCE. These wars have been subject to endless study and popular reception from antiquity to present day, and their history is deeply entangled in 2.5 millennia worth of myth and misunderstanding. The modern retellings are founded on a group of ancient Greek writings, principally those of Aeschylus, the first surviving Greek tragedian from Athens, who wrote a tragedy called The Persians, about the Persian attack on Athens. Herodotus, the first Greek historian, and his monumental work, The Histories, and Plutarch, the celebrated biographer writing in Rome and Greece. Together, the works of these Greek authors present a vision of the outnumbered Greeks' heroic resistance to Achaemenid imperial aggression, royal tyranny, and seemingly unstoppable armies and navies. The survival of this challenge by Athens and Sparta and their Greek allies has furnished modern audiences with potent frameworks for symbolic comparison with past conflict, But Achaemenid Persia did not leave behind its own analytic narratives of these political and military events. And the lack of an account from the Achaemenid side, what Robert Graves, the poet, called the Persian version, leaves a tremendous source gap and a deep problem of credibility in traditional efforts to understand and analyze the Persian Wars. What did the Persian Wars mean to the Persians? My approach to this historical problem builds on the work of many scholars over the last 2 generations who created the academic field of Achaemenid Persian studies. Scholars like Pierre Briand, Amelie Kurt, Josef Wiesehofer, Robert Rollinger, and many more have developed and expanded this vibrant discipline. The core philosophy of the discipline of Achaemenid studies is to study history's first world empire on its own terms, privileging internal documentation, art, and archaeology to reconstruct its worldviews, its administrative, economic, and social systems, and its cultural dynamics. This has allowed us to contextualize and, when necessary, to correct the Greek testimonies, which make up part, but not the preeminent part of the source tradition on the Achaemenid Persian world and its interactions with the Greeks. My new book is the first to offer a comprehensive study of Persia's Greek campaigns, which tries to apply internal Achaemenid evidence in an extended dialogue and critique of the Greek military narratives advanced by Herodotus and Aeschylus and Plutarch. So I'd like to talk with you today about the types of evidence I use from inside the Achaemenid Empire, the types of questions that the book poses to try to see the Persian-Greek conflicts in a new light, and my arguments for how we can better understand Persia's Greek campaigns and their meaning for the Persian Empire and world history. There are several important strands of internal evidence that allow us to open up Achaemenid Persian perspectives on kingship, on the practices and belief systems of frontier imperialism, and the practice of imperial warfare. First, the royal texts of the Achaemenid Persian kings, a series of relatively short monumental inscriptions, often in multiple languages, including Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. These inscriptions at sites like the Bisitun Monument, the royal Achaemenid tombs at Nakhche Rostam, and the palace complexes at Susa and Persepolis give us the official insights into the value system and the conception of universal rule and divinely favored kingship that animated Achaemenid royal performance. Second, we have important bodies of comparative evidence from the larger groups of royal inscriptions left behind by the Assyrian kings and the Babylonian kings and temples in ancient Mesopotamia. The Assyrian annals and the Babylonian chronicles give us much more detailed narratives of political and military events, but they also enrich our understanding of mental maps of empire and the rules for performative kingship. Both the Assyrian and Babylonian empires influenced the later Persian Empire's imperial practice and ideology. Equally important for understanding the real workings of empire is the Persepolis Fortification Archive, a body of thousands of administrative documents from the reign of Darius I, discovered in his palace at Persepolis. These documents from the late 500s and the 490s BCE reveal the workings of the imperial system on a granular day-to-day level. These include many of the foundations of frontier military capability, as well as the practice of kingship and governance in the imperial center. The tablets unveil aspects of the movement of the royal court and workforces and soldiers, communication networks that linked the royal family with the frontiers and provincial governors, and the organization of workforces and military manpower and the supply systems necessary to sustain them. Last but not least, we have a great amount of evidence for Achaemenid weaponry, armor, and visual depictions of soldiers in palace sculptures and seals containing miniature battle scenes. These illustrate the means, the methods, and the internal perceptions of Persian soldiers and military action. Together, all of these types of evidence allow us to check the narrative of Herodotus and his Greek colleagues at many different points. And they give us material to shape three crucial questions from the Achaemenid perspective that I set out to answer in the book. Why did the Persians try to conquer the Greeks? Why did King Xerxes of Persia lead a personal campaign against Athens and its allies in 480 and 479 BCE? And what were the causes and consequences of the Persian military defeats that took place during Xerxes' campaign? I want to start with this basic question about the empire's relationship to its Achaemenid, or excuse me, to its Aegean frontier and the Greek city-states around it, up in the northwestern part of this map. What did the Greeks and their conquest mean to the Persian Empire? And why would it be desirable for Persian rulers to sponsor projects of military expansion across the Aegean Sea? The traditional narrative of the Persian Wars imagines an Achaemenid conquest state committed to unlimited expansion. As Herodotus makes Xerxes' claim, they imagine the possibility to make Persian territory coterminous with the expanse of Zeus's heavens. And the Greeks themselves were unfortunate enough to sit in the way of this imperial juggernaut. Alternatively, revisionist approaches by some modern scholars, such as Jack Balser or George Cockwell, have suggested that given the limited wealth and size of the Greek cities compared with other regions of the empire, such as Egypt, the campaigns into Greece could have been only of minor importance from the Persian Empire's perspective. In my book, I suggest that both of these views are problematic. On the one hand, the Achaemenid royal inscriptions and comparisons with Mesopotamian texts indicate that none of Persia's kings, from Cyrus the Great to Xerxes, had any intention of marching to the ends of the earth in literal geographical terms. Instead, they inherited a symbolic geography from the earlier Mesopotamian empires, as expressed in the famous Babylonian world map tablet that you see in the upper right. This envisioned a civilized sphere of human settlement encircled by surrounding seas, with turbulent regions of chaos and danger across the water at the world's outermost margins. The establishment of a claim to universal rule in Mesopotamian and later Persian tradition required the king to demonstrate his authority across the four quadrants of this world and to travel from upper sea to lower sea between the different marginal bodies of water, or most impressively, if he could, to reach and cross the waters at the outer corners of the empire. This ideological script is also evident in the ways that Achaemenid royal inscriptions organize the lists of peoples that they rule. These are typically arranged first by listing subjects in the Iranian core, and then by spelling out groups of subjects in four directions, extending outwards across the four quadrants of the universal empire. The claim to rule over all these subjects, though, was compatible with a flexible approach to governance. And we see the Achaemenids offering practical autonomy in relationships with many of their more distant coastal and overseas neighbors. Darius and Xerxes might claim authority over the people they called the Yauna, or the Greeks, at the edge of the sea and across it. But this did not require the establishment of a Persian satrap or standing military forces in Greek cities or on the far sides of the water. In analogy to Persia's interactions with the Phoenician and Cypriot city-states, the Achaemenids preferred that their satraps, based at places like Sardis and Ascilium in Anatolia, should project authority over a wider network of local client rulers. And these clients would manage their own communities from Ionia to the far side of the Aegean in partnership with imperial authority. The acquisition of tokens of loyalty and cooperation and profit from these clients was sufficient to sustain an ideological claim to world rule. And the inscriptions of Darius and Xerxes represent that world rule as fully complete, not requiring further steps of territorial expansion. The maintenance of authority over the Aegean Greeks was especially important in symbolic terms because of their position at the outer edge of one of the four sequences of subject groups at the margins. In more pragmatic terms, the Greek region was also extremely lucrative for the empire for its extensive supplies of silver, especially in the territory of Athens, and its widespread shipping and maritime trade connections. To sum up, then, Persian military actions against Greek communities that tried to resist integration into this world system were not expressions of a desire to occupy the entire earth and march across Europe, nor did the Achaemenids envision anything like a clash between Eastern and Western cultures, as sometimes imagined by modern readers of Herodotus. But they did expect to gain symbolic and economic profit from their dealings with Greek clients. And the display of imperial power over Aegean communities was not a project of minor importance. If it had been, there was no reason why Darius should have committed such extensive military forces to reconquering Ionian Greeks who rebelled against the empire from 499 to 493 BCE. Nor was there a reason, if Greece was not important to Persia, for Xerxes to campaign in person against Athens and its allies across the sea. This brings us to our next big question about the objectives and meanings of royal power display. What was the significance of a royal campaign in the Persian imperial context? And how did the king's presence influence the scale and objectives of military operations? How did ancient Western Asian and Achaemenid rulers define objectives and success in royal campaigns? And what are the implications? We have to start by noting the differences between the terminology of war, as articulated by Greek and Roman authors and modern European theorists, and the ancient Western Asian or Achaemenid sense of royal campaigns. The Achaemenid Persians and their Assyrian and Babylonian predecessors celebrated victorious battles and moments of conquest and the suppression of revolts against their authority. But they do not really articulate the concept of winning a war in terms of a prolonged conflict between two sides with a clearly defined beginning and end, or winner and loser. Instead, they framed their understanding of organized state violence around discrete military campaigns, expeditions which displayed force and dominance in particular regions against selected opponents, and in the most prestigious cases were led in person by a king. Such campaigns might include strategic or operational goals in our terms, capturing a specific city or defeating an opposing army or leader portrayed as a source of evil, chaos, and disorder, or perhaps avenging previous harms or insults. But a king did not need to command in person in order to accomplish such finite objectives. This is shown by Darius's choice to delegate command against the Ionian rebels and to punish Athens' support for those rebels through military forces led by his sons-in-law and subordinate generals. A royal campaign's chief purpose was enhancement and dissemination of the king's heroic political image. It was designed to gather the largest conceivable demographic audience, to accompany this audience on an extended royal journey to the outer frontier zone, and to engage with these audiences in a sequence of spectacular power displays. The audiences enlisted as witnesses and participants in the royal pageant included officials of the court, aristocrats and client kings and their families and servants, the soldiers of the palace, army and additional conscripts, subject groups engaged in transport of material and supply of foodstuffs and payment of taxes to support the expedition, and representatives of frontier clients and enemy populations, whether captives or envoys, to be awed by the show of imperial invincibility. The intended benefits of such a rolling spectacle included advertisement of the king's superiority to predecessors and rivals, as well as the empire's strength and prosperity. Xerxes' Greek expedition marked a culmination of a centuries-old tradition of performative royal campaigns, especially well attested in Assyria and Babylonia, as well as the Persian Empire's early stages under Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius. Assyrian and Babylonian royal campaigns had begun as an annual obligation, requiring kings to show off their warrior credentials and divinely backed legitimacy through repeated incursions into border regions that they contested with rival kingdoms, such as Egypt or Elam. This model evolved, though, with increases in imperial size and the elimination of state rivals, and especially when Persia annexed the neighboring kingdoms and grew to more than twice the size of its predecessors. Cyrus and Darius led campaigns to extend their empire's frontier zones, but unlike the Assyrian and Babylonian monarchs, they do not appear to have marched to the same region more than once. The empire's greater size meant that a single royal frontier campaign could last as long as 3 years, from departure from the Iranian core to eventual return. And the king had to be more selective about where and how often he displayed his power through military expedition. After winning a chaotic war of succession and crushing internal revolts in 522 and 521, Darius seems to have led just 4 royal campaigns, acting out his claim to universal kingship by marching to the corners of the Persian imperial world, the Saka lands in the northeast, Egypt in the southwest, India in the southeast, and Thrace and the Scythian frontier to the northwest. For the remaining quarter century of his reign, Darius ruled from the center of his empire, displaying authority through palace building and annual progresses around his central provinces, and delegating administration and military action to provincial satraps and generals. When the Ionian Revolt broke out in the 22nd year of his reign, Darius had already campaigned to the northwestern corner of the universe, and he did not need to repeat that visit. Rather, he could deal with this challenge through delegation in military terms. Here, the Persepolis fortification tablets are extremely valuable in documenting some of the messenger exchanges between Darius and his satraps in Anatolia and other coastal regions. We don't have his actual letters, but we have the receipts for messengers supplied along the communication route, and they show the king's ability to rapidly disseminate orders and coordinate land and naval forces from multiple regions to respond to a localized problem. On Xerxes' succession, as a younger son of the previous monarch Darius, there was a natural impetus to prove his worthiness by going back to his father's early campaign pattern and exceeding Darius's achievements by visiting at least some regions not directly targeted in the last set of royal campaigns. So Xerxes led a first campaign against Egyptian rebels and suppressed a Babylonian revolt, although perhaps not in person, while he returned to Iran. A second campaign against Aegean Greeks allowed him to visit a second corner of the universe, and crucially, to fight specific opponents in the northwest whom Darius had not yet confronted in person. Xerxes could try to deliver justice to Athenians who had repelled the Persian punitive expedition at Marathon, and the Athenians and Spartans responsible for killing imperial messengers during Darius's reign. Xerxes brought along Greek exiles, the family of the late tyrant Hippias from Athens and the former co-king of Sparta, Demaratus. And he doubtlessly meant to install these Greeks as rightful rulers of their communities, who would participate in his universal rule as cooperative clients. But specific acts of vengeance, justice, or regime change were not the sole measures of success when a king such as Xerxes set out to visit the edges of the world. The effectiveness of the royal campaign depended on its ability to satisfy the different dimensions of performative spectacle. And I would divide these into 5 major categories that we will review in turn. The first would be displays of universal rule. As we've seen, these can be showed off through Cyrus's and Darius's campaigns to the outer frontiers, displaying power over the 4 quarters of the universe from sea to sea or across the sea. Xerxes' Greek expedition matched or exceeded the prior royal campaigns in terms of its length, distance, and duration. The king, court, and guards appear to have traveled between 2,500 and 2,800 miles from Susa to Athens, depending on the exact route they took. Here we have one possible Google route. And they took a full 3 years from departure in 481 to return, probably early in 478. Xerxes gets back to Susa. The king's engineers were able to bridge the Hellespont, a notable body of water at the outer reaches of empire. They carved a canal through the Athos Peninsula, and beyond the sea, Xerxes cruised on a ship down the coast of Thessaly, and then returned to shore to lead his army across the passes of the Mount Olympus range, thereby signifying a heroic royal triumph over natural obstacles at the world's distant margins. Another spectacle was the display of imperial political cohesion throughout this imperial campaign. In the wake of the Ionian revolt against Darius and the rebellions in Egypt and Babylon suppressed by Xerxes, the Greek campaign showed off the king's ability to unite the manpower of loyal regions with those who returned to loyalty in the common imperial project. And Xerxes' ability to lead all of these subjects, the fully loyal and the formerly disloyal, together out to the outer frontiers. Xerxes traveled to the Aegean with his entire extended family, his wife and children, his siblings, cousins, in-laws, and nobles, staged his confidence in Achaemenid dynastic unity. They also advertised his possession of multiple heirs to the throne as he brings his young sons along on the campaign. And the assembly of numerous client rulers from Phoenicia, Cyprus, Anatolia, dozens of Ionian city-states and Thracian chieftains, and the king of Macedonia, Alexander I. All of these together showed off Xerxes' position as the king of kings at the top of a hierarchy of authority. And they promoted competition for Xerxes' favor between his different clients and elites and subjects, but all working together in a common imperial project. A third aspect of campaign spectacle was the spectacle of unlimited manpower and naval power. Herodotus infamously exaggerates Xerxes' military numbers into the many millions of men and thousands of ships. And this is designed to characterize the campaign through a Greek framework of Persian hubris and looming fated disaster. But the numbers that took part in Xerxes' campaign must have been enormous still in real terms, even if they reached nowhere near Herodotus's statistics. Due to the combination of the royal court, the palace army, regional contingents, a trireme navy, and a convoy fleet recruited from across the eastern Mediterranean in order to outnumber and overwhelm the naval forces of Athens and Sparta and their allies. Persian numbers were very high indeed. In the book, I get into the mathematics of numerical estimations and suggest the minimum sizes necessary for the Persian forces to still outnumber the Greek opponents by sea at Salamis and by land at Plataia, even after partial losses and detachments along the way. I suggest that the minimum estimates for Xerxes' force would require a land army of at least 50,000 soldiers and at least 20,000 non-combatants. and a naval fleet of at least 650 warships, maybe half of Herodotus's total, plus a supporting convoy of hundreds more. The total naval manpower of which probably added up to at least 150,000 men. Putting together the forces on land and sea, you end up with minimum estimates that bring the manpower total involved in the campaign over well over 200,000. Not only reviews and royal parades, but the movement and encampment, and especially the supply of these numbers, the people and the animals necessary to support the land forces, constituted a tremendous show of imperial wealth and organizational power for those who participated in or witnessed even parts of the display. And the king's charisma was thereby connected with the ability to support these vast forces. The Persepolis archives illustrate sophisticated techniques of supply and infrastructure that made the spectacle possible. And in a full chapter in the book, I get into the gritty details of Achaemenid logistical performance. A fourth form of campaign spectacle was the display of military victory and divine favor. The climax of the royal campaign was an attempted display of favor by the patron god Ahura Mazda through seeking opportunities for battle and conquest. There's the expectation that the king's advance would inspire submission or provoke flight among many of the hostile populations in the campaign's path. And the heroic ruler would be empowered by divine force to smite those enemies who still dared to oppose him in person. The Achaemenids' patron deity, Ahura Mazda, guaranteed success in battle to the legitimate ruler whom he favored and placed on the throne, a theme stressed by both Darius in his Bisitun inscription and Xerxes in texts like his Diva inscription from Persepolis. This script of divinely endorsed royal victory would have played out before the audiences Xerxes assembled to see his victory at Thermopylae, where he overpowered a Spartan king who dared to oppose him in battle, and in the spectacular conquest of the city of Athens that followed. The seizure and sack of mighty cities appears throughout earlier Mesopotamian campaign accounts as a crowning royal achievement, demonstrating the power to overthrow enemy defenses and the gods' abandonment of enemies whose sanctuaries and treasures fell into the conqueror's hands. From this ideological viewpoint, surely shared by the Persians, the flight of the Athenian populace would have only enhanced the force of Xerxes' victory. On the other hand, the occurrence of a defeat in the royal presence posed the risk of ideological embarrassment, and the naval fiasco at Salamis threatened a specter of divine abandonment for Xerxes himself, given his presence and oversight at the battle. This must have required efforts to distance the king from this failure in the wake of this spectacle gone wrong. But the final test of a royal campaign, and our last spectacle of the royal campaign, is the monarch's safe, triumphal return, bearing the spoils of the campaign and captives to be displayed in the imperial center. Here, Aeschylus's and Herodotus's presentations of announcements of defeat and mass mourning are surely products of Greek fantasy. It is clear that despite Salamis, Xerxes did not so much retreat as return, first to Sardis and then to Iran, as he would have done anyway in the return journey. And despite the defeat of Mardonius, Persian troops left behind, and Persia's Greek clients at Plataea, Xerxes surely took every step to fulfill expectations of triumphal return, including the display of captives and the disposal of art objects, such as the famous tyrannicide statues taken from Athens back to the royal palaces. To sum up, Xerxes' campaign was successful in achieving each of these performative objectives of spectacle, even in the last two categories, and even if Salamis and Plataea tarnished or undercut the full force of the military invincibility of the king. So this brings us to our last big question. Why did the Persians lose at Salamis and Plataea? Did these setbacks stem from overextension and logistical failure, as argued in some prior revisionist studies, or did they result from technological or tactical deficiencies against better equipped Greeks? Whatever the causes of the lost battles, what were their consequences for the empire? Now, based on the Persians' ability to occupy Athens, but also to continue a land campaign with large numbers over the following campaign season in 479, it appears that Xerxes' campaign was a logistical success. A full Persian army left behind under the general Mardonius wintered in Greece and spent 9 months there before engaging in large-scale military operations. Arguments that the supply system broke down are based on a handful of unpersuasive Greek references. The system shown in the Persepolis tablets does not seem to have broken down in supporting Xerxes' progress to the frontier and back from the frontier. Naval supply convoys seem to have been sufficient to support the fleet until Salamis and were less necessary after it. And requisitions from Greek clients from Macedonia to Boeotia, mentioned occasionally in passing by Herodotus, probably played a large role in sustaining Persian military operations, even in those places where supply depots had not been built years in advance. There is no reason to assume that food shortage contributed to poor decision-making that led to the battles at Salamis and Plataea. The setbacks in battle were also not the result of any systemic military inferiority. There is no evidence that Achaemenid triremes, including those of the Ionian Greeks in Xerxes' navy, were fundamentally less effective in combat to the warships used by anti-Persian Greeks. Careful study of the material and visual evidence for Persian soldiers' armor and weapons, especially spears, which occupy a crucial role in battle scenes on Achaemenid seals, shows that these weapons were fully compatible with those used by Greek opponents. It is more likely that the military defeats at Salamis and Plataea stemmed from errors in tactical management. Here we can look at this image and map of the battle at Salamis, where Xerxes' navy faltered and failed against the Greek naval forces of Athens, Sparta, and their allies. At Salamis, a crucial factor seems to have been Xerxes' order to fight in the dangerously cramped water of the Salamis Narrows. And here this idea is actually supported both by Herodotus and by studies of the topography and the water level in the channel. At Plataea, the Persian general Mardonius managed to deny supplies to the Spartan-led Greeks for a period of several days before the final engagement. But when the Greek forces tried to withdraw, Mardonius launched a hasty pursuit, and Persian forces lined up in columns and traveled down the roads near Plataea to try to catch up to the supposedly retreating Greeks. When the Greeks turned to fight, the Persian forces were caught, were not able to bring up their entire forces to outnumber the enemy at the key points of combat. So at Plataea and at Salamis alike, what we see are tactical problems based on the management of space. We see a failure in both battles in which the commanders are unable to fully bring their decisive numbers to bear to outmaneuver and overwhelm the enemy. And these problems of tactical decision-making on the day of the battle seem to be more at fault rather than larger systemic issues in the loss of these two battles. The battles of Salamis and Plataea did not break the Achaemenid imperial military or the larger imperial system, and did not deter the Persians from taking further action. They did carry real consequences for the king and the empire, including the economic costs and the human cost, which certainly added up into tens of thousands of lives between these battles, other skirmishes, outbreaks of disease, and the storms that plagued the Aegean fleet. They certainly caused some embarrassment and required face-saving measures, which we can see in the Persian scapegoating of Mardonius, some of which makes its way into Herodotus's narrative. Yet Xerxes surely attempted to present his overall campaign as a royal success, as suggested by Herodotus and Diochrysostom, but especially by some examples of Achaemenid seal art, and especially the image that I use on the cover of my book, impression probably from a seal from the Persepolis treasury known as PTS 28, in which the royal hero stabs a defeated warrior marked as a Greek hoplite by his Corinthian helmet, and leads a group of bound Greek prisoners behind him on a rope. It is true that in the aftermath of the campaign, the defeat and withdrawal of Xerxes' forces temporarily destabilized the Persian Empire's hold on its Aegean frontier network and Greek clients, and it set the stage for the emergence of a hostile Athenian hegemony in the Aegean Sea region. But within a few decades, this gave way to a period of more effective diplomatic engagement between Persia and Athens, starting under the reign of Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes I, who reframed the image of imperial power, moving away from the need for direct royal campaigns as an expression of imperial power, and instead moving towards diplomatic peace negotiations and the idea of integrating an Athenian trade partner into the empire's sphere of influence. In closing, Xerxes' invasion of Greece was neither an expression of blind lust for unending conquest, nor was it a simple response to Athenian or Spartan hostility on the Aegean frontier. Rather, it responded to traditional expectations of royal performance at the outset of a reign, and in the wake of internal unrest, which sought to reassert imperial cohesion and the king's heroic image through spectacles of might on the frontiers. Xerxes' campaign fulfilled most expectations of this royal performance, despite its stumbles at Salamis and Plataia. These setbacks in Greece laid the foundation for an evolution and diplomatic adaptation into a new phase of imperial maturity. The progression of Aegean frontier warfare, from Darius to Artaxerxes, was therefore a vital stage in the evolution of Achaemenid imperialism, and its contextual study enriches our understanding of ancient Persia and the dynamics of ancient world history. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, John. That was really great, and I loved all the pictures and the pictures of the sort of the battlefields that you could see as how it looks now. So thank you very much. And if we've got like 106 people watching right now live, which is wonderful. So there's plenty of people who might have questions. We've actually already received one, so I'll share the questions, and audience members, if you do have a question, please just enter it into, there's a Q&A tab like there along the bottom of your screen. So you can enter your questions there and I'll see them and then I'll ask them to John on your behalf. So the question we already have here is, so the questioner sort of comments that, in the past, elite English language education taught more about ancient Persia. And they comment that X used to stand for Xerxes, not X-ray, which actually I didn't know. So that's really interesting. But then commenting that, well, currently, certainly in the UK curriculum, and it may be true in the US curriculum as well, that we tend to teach so much more, or teach only about the Greek part of the Greek and Persian wars. And they're asking, are scholars doing anything to try to change that? I mean, your scholarship obviously is looking at it from the other perspective, but how solitary, how alone are you in that endeavor? And are things changing?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And it goes to the heart of what many of my colleagues and I are hopefully trying to pursue in teaching classes in our university settings, but also reaching out to educators at other levels, and trying to find opportunities like this to share our scholarship with wider audiences. Several of my colleagues, notably my good friend Professor John Lee at University of California, Santa Barbara, have engaged in measures to try to advocate for Persia's inclusion in state educational curricula. So in California, where there's obviously a very large Iranian diaspora community, People were finding that they were getting a secondary school education that ignored the Persian Empire and jumped straight into Greece and Rome. And steps have actually been taken at the state level there to try to change that, mandate some education on Persia in teaching. So many of us are doing this in whatever ways we can. It's a field where we're continuing to learn more about how to approach the ancient Persians. And we're trying to ensure or trying to advocate that Persia isn't simply known in terms of its relationship with the Greeks. That Xerxes and Darius are more than just their encounters with the Greek world.
Yeah.
Granted, my book is about Persian-Greek encounter, but what I really try to set out and do in this book, one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, was to try to take this moment of conflict, but to put it in a much larger imperial context. And the book does go into more depth on the wider empire, the economic systems that hold it together, administration, and really try to pan out to see the larger Persian imperial world.
Yeah.
It
That
wasn't
sounds
just
so
about
interesting.
Xerxes
Yeah.
and Alexander.
Yes, because otherwise, I suppose it's reinforcing a sort of a Western-centric, a Eurocentric viewpoint if it's always Persia in relation to the Greeks. So
Yeah.
that sounds wonderful. And actually, Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones comments that in his own teaching at Cardiff, he teaches Achaemenid history at Cardiff, and that he's working with GCSE and A-level boards in the UK right now to bring Persia into classical civilization studies, I presume, so and ancient history courses.
Thank
So
you so
that,
much, Lloyd, for your comment, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing.
yeah.
Lloyd, again, has been a tireless advocate for the importance of studying ancient Persia, but also the importance of communicating what scholars are doing in the research settings with the widest possible audiences.
Mm,
And it's really important that he and many other scholars have been promoting the crossing of international boundaries and the sharing of scholarship on ancient Persia with Iranians in Iran and abroad,
mm.
as well as with a world audience to try to show Persia's historical importance.
Great. We've got people commenting and just thanking you for your talk. So without a question, but saying thank you for your fascinating talk. So I just thought I'd share that good feedback with you. And then we have a
Thank you all so
question.
much.
Is there any indication in the historical record that these campaigns included political punishment? Was Xerxes using these campaigns to belittle rivals and display royal dominance to press them into offering resources, I guess loot for the royal campaign?
That's, I mean, certainly there are political aspects and certainly an element of what happens when Xerxes' forces move through Greece is punitive action against select Greek targets who have engaged in some kind of prominent defiance towards Persian authority. So, of course, that includes Athens. The Athenians had reached out for Persian imperial support in the early years of the Athenian democracy, around 507 BCE. They had floated the idea of an alliance with the Persian Empire, but then backpedaled. And then they had given military aid to Ionian Greek rebels against Persia. And then when Darius sent ambassadors to Athens and other Greek cities after that revolt to ask for tokens of cooperation and loyalty, the Athenians and the Spartans had killed the ambassadors. And so those are going to be targeted for political punishment. But it's crucial to remember that Xerxes also brought along political exiles from Athens and Sparta. And I tell my students that the Persian-Greek wars are typically oversimplified in the modern understanding, um, popularized as conflicts between Persians and Greeks without understanding of the nuances. When Xerxes' forces take Athens, they burn down the temples on the Acropolis. Uh, but the part that's often left out, which Herodotus mentions, is the Athenian exiles are then allowed to progress up to the Acropolis and to sacrifice to Athena with Xerxes' blessing in their sacred space. So there is
Mm.
political punishment for the factions within potential client communities that are resisting the empire. But the Persians were very careful to try to balance this with shows of political support for the people they want to project as legitimate client rulers. And so I don't want to diminish the fact that this included, in our modern terms, this included atrocity, this included violence, as you see in really any empire in world history and the military actions associated with empire. There are atrocities and war crimes. There are mass burnings of civilian settlements. Herodotus refers to sexual violence. There are certainly episodes that would have taken place that were part of that punitive crackdown. And I don't want to diminish that and sound like I'm giving a rosy view of empire.
Sure.
But right,
Thank you.
they tried to balance this with a political language of legitimacy and justice.
Yes, thank you. Okay, another question is about Zoroastrianism. So, do you think that the performance of royalty can tell us anything about the form of Zoroastrianism that was practiced in the Achaemenid Empire?
Sure, this is a matter that's greatly debated, and it's been the subject of an enormous amount of scholarship by many specialists in Iranian religious history who are more qualified to get into the technical details than I am. You certainly see elements of Xerxes' power displays that include ritual and piety. Um, it's harder to find explicit evidence for um, Zoroastrian practices that map perfectly onto something that Herodotus describes in the course of the Greek campaign. But of course, there are a number of different ritual practices involved in the worship of Ahura Mazda. The king must have engaged in daily ceremony and daily ritual. Herodotus mentions him offering libations and engaging in prayer on several occasions. And he mentions that Xerxes is surrounded by magi as part of his court entourage, and that magi are engaged in religious ritual and in responses to omens. The probably is a religious element after defeats such as Salamis or after disease outbreaks. Herodotus mentions the Magi praying during the storms that plagued the Persian fleet to try to bring the bad weather to an end. So I think, yeah, there are clearly elements of what evolve into more familiar Zoroastrian practice that are going on already. But on the other hand, when we have the Greek narrative, that many portions of that can be lost in translation.
Great, yeah. Another question actually relates to the defeat at Salamis and asking how did the Persians explain or minimize this? I guess I'm assuming the questioner means to their own sort of constituents. Did they
Right. Well,
emphasize or exaggerate the successful parts of the campaign, or was the element of defeat also discussed back
our
home?
best evidence for the Persian framing of the campaign is the visual evidence from these seals, and especially the PTS-28 seal from Persepolis. Um, so the seals are going to give an idealized image of the royal warrior overcoming his enemies, binding his enemies, and bringing order in the place of disorder. They are probably not going to address, in anything like art or official communications, they're probably not going to address the details of military defeat.
Mm.
And certainly Xerxes didn't come home in rags, as Aeschylus imagines for a Greek tragedy, right, to lament his defeat on the stage in front of a Persian audience. Certainly, even Herodotus claims that Xerxes sent messengers home to tell them about the Battle of Salamis and that there was mass mourning in Susa. Uh, but Herodotus may be using Aeschylus as his source. And I
Mm.
think there's no reason to believe that there's any reality behind a royal pronouncement that we lost and we all need to mourn. On the other hand, Xerxes lost members of his own family. There are at least 11 half brothers or cousins or in laws of Xerxes who die in the course of the campaign. And that shouldn't be minimized. That was an event that must have impacted the nobility and the court elite and the royal family. and there had to be funerals. There had to be maybe not an empire-wide mourning or an admission of defeat.
Mm,
Um, so presumably, we're not fully informed on this, but we've got the art image of the heroic king, which could be circulated in miniature. Presumably, there were images that the king's subordinates have lost some battles, and there have been losses, and we mourn our losses. Maybe individuals who have died, but they must have balanced this, as the art suggests, with the image that the king ultimately was triumphant.
mm.
He punished Athens, and he came home in triumph with spoils and captives.
Great, thank you. We're almost at the end of time. I'm sorry that we won't be able to get through all of the questions because we've got a very enthusiastic audience. But I'll just give you one last question, John.
Thank you.
And that is, what part did Bulgaria play in the different invasions of Greece during the Xerxes or Darius realms?
So Bulgaria is part of the region that was referred to as Thrace by the ancient Greeks, and
Mhm.
there are a number of different Thracian tribes and local kingdoms or chiefdoms that they are one of the frontier population groups on the other side of the Aegean Sea. There's also some recent scholarship on the Persepolis fortification tablets that suggests there were close cultural and possibly linguistic linkages between the Thracians and some of the Phrygian populations of what's now central and western Turkey. It's possible that the terminology used for one frontier population in Persian records, the Scudra, uh, this may refer to both Phrygians and Thracians across this northwestern cultural zone. Uh,
Mm,
so Bulgaria and parts of modern day Greece were certainly impacted by this. The campaign itself marched fairly close to the coast in terms of the land forces. Um, so it would have passed through modern day European Turkey and Greece. But
mm,
there were certainly populations from what's now Bulgaria that were part of the workforces and that probably had people conscripted, at least in small contingents, to go along with the campaign.
mm.
Right, the Thracians, along with uh, Alexander the First of Macedonia, and along with the Ionian Greeks and other people around the Aegean, they were all brought into this campaign. And Xerxes supposedly made a major impact there. When his forces pulled out, there was still at least one Persian fortress that lasted near the modern Greek-Turkish border and was not captured by the Athenians for several more decades. And there's probably a continuation of cultural and economic exchange between the Persians in their last Aegean outposts and people in modern parts of modern Bulgaria and Greece and Turkey.
Well, thank you so much. In fact, the last comment that has just come in is thank you so much for a fantastic talk, Professor Hyland, and thank you for speaking to us. And so I will reiterate that myself. It's been absolutely fascinating, and it's amazing, how knowledgeable we can be about something that happened so long ago. It's hard for the brain to sort of compute like how many years ago this all happened and how hard it must be to access your data, as it were, your information. So it's just been absolutely fascinating to hear, and I can see that the audience members have been very stimulated by your talk. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. Thank you for your questions. I'm so sorry we were unable to get through all of them. And thank you, John, for your time. And I guess we just have to tell everyone to read your book if they want to find out
Yeah,
a little bit
thank you
more.
so much. It
Thank
was
you.
my pleasure speaking with all of you. I just want to put in a final plug to check out my book and also over the next few years, keep your eyes peeled for my next book. I'm
Yeah.
writing a follow-up on how the modern world has engaged with the Persian Wars as a symbol. And I'm trying to look at the receptions of the Persian War tradition, encounters with this tradition in modern Iran and Greece as well as other European countries and the United States.
That sounds
There's so
fantastic.
much more to explore with this topic.
We'll have to have you back. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much,
much.
John, and thanks everyone, and have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.